Yeah. And you went through a traditional publishing house, or how'd you go about getting it published?
Well, I made that run. You know what I mean? Like I spent this book I wrote for 10 years. That process took 10 years to bring out. And a lot of that was the first 2 and 3 years was writing it, bringing the manuscript to completion. Then I spent probably 5 years trying to sell it to agents, to publishers. I went all different routes. I have not thousands, but I have hundreds of rejections and hundreds of ignored messages. And it was that was a hard process, but um, it makes you resilient. And then finally, so I was going through that process while I was still overseas, and I came back to Washington for a little while, and I was able to kind of hunker down and really focus. And I built up a blog and did book reviews. And I think doing the book reviews helped me get attention to my craft and sort of in that context, I uncovered two publishers. They're independent publishers. This one was published by New Pulp Press. It's an independent publisher, and they took on all the labor and the costs of putting it out. And so, yeah, it's not traditional, but it's also sort of, it wasn't something that I had to put out on my own, which I appreciate. I liked having the platform of another outside source having vetted my work and said, this is good enough.
Absolutely, yeah. That validation is like something I know for myself as a writer and creator. It's like I crave it. Like I need it so bad. And for you to have, like you said, have those thousands of rejections, and then just still keep on trucking along. I mean, that's inspirational, man. That's like, I know there's so many people out there. I've talked to a lot of indie authors who are in the querying process of trying to find an agent, trying to find a publisher. What kind of advice would you give to them?
You got to keep at it, and I think you've got to not keep sending the same thing out. You need to revise, and it also means take it back off the market for a little while and revisit your manuscript, see what's wrong with not just how you're selling your story, but with your story itself. And then, and this might seem as a bit of a antithetical to what writers really want to do, but I would even make an argument for look at what's going on in your environment that could help you sell it. Is there a way you can add a hook? And it doesn't have to be phony. It can still be authentic, but what can you do to make this interesting from a marketing standpoint?
Yeah. Okay.
Well, so and that's sort of, this is a perfect example. I was trying to sell satire, and I had bites. I will say I had, I sat down with a New York agent at one point, and it's kind of a long story, so I won't tell it, but this guy had read my thing, and he shows up at the table where we met, and he plunks down the manuscript that I mailed to him, hundreds of pages. This was, at the time, the story was like 100,000 words long, and he had all those pages there, and he marked all over it, and he sent me marching away with ideas to make it better. So I had gone that route, but then it just sort of fizzled for me. I mean, this was a timely story when the war on terror was hot, but then as George Bush years started to wane, there was less and less interest. And so I had to recognize that reality. And what I did was I started reviewing books, like I said, and I found that, crime fiction really interested me. And it was also kind of an easier sell. There was more of a market for it. So I rewrote the whole story all over again. And
oh my gosh.
I took the sort of broad-ranging narrative and I focused it on the diplomatic security officer whose name is Jeff Mutton. And I sort of made Jeff Mutton the storyteller. And he's your hard-boiled dick. He's your hard-boiled cop telling the story.
Nice. Okay.
And so I gave him a nice little problem. I gave him a foot fetish. So here he is in a country like Saudi Arabia, and he's got a foot fetish to deal with. So, it was I made it both serious and more fun in that way. And I changed the whole story, but the story, that contrast and conflict between diplomacy and security, the need to be out and the need to be safe, are still here. They're still very much here, but it's told in a different way than it ever looked like it was going to be when I first started writing it.
Wow. So yeah, the 10-year process really taught you a lot about what, man, that's incredible to reinvent your entire story, basically.
Yeah.
Basically. Yeah. But that's the thing you got to do, right? I mean, if you want to be a writer and if you want people to read what you're writing, it's like, you have to make certain cuts and sacrifices, I suppose. And it's all about getting better too, right?
I mean, yeah, I do think there's a sacrifice involved. I think that, I still admire the concept of Catch-22, and I think this story had its strengths as it was, but I also made it better in its own way. So yeah, you got to be willing to part. They say kill your darlings, right? And
Mm.
but I gave new life to this, and it's better in some ways, it's worse in others, but it's out there. The story is out there, and I love that. And even if nobody's picking it up or reading it or commenting on it, at least for me, it's like, do your worst, world. I'm out there. I like
Yeah, so it's available Amazon.
Barnes and Noble,